The fog rolled in from the North Sea like a living wall, thick and cold, swallowing the coastline of Norfolk in sheets of grey. RAF Coltishall sat quiet in the early morning darkness of September 17, 1941, the kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. Ground crews moved like ghosts through the mist, their breath visible in the damp air. Spitfires lined the hardstands, wings dripping with condensation, their Merlin engines silent but ready. The war had taught these men to sleep light and wake fast. Flight Lieutenant David Cartwright stood in the control tower, staring out at nothing. His eyes burned from lack of sleep. 2 nights prior, they'd scrambled 4 times. False alarms, radar ghosts, maybe a lone Heinkel that never showed. The strain was visible in every man's face. The Battle of Britain had ended, but the tension hadn't. Every day brought new orders, new threats, new ways to die. Cartwright sipped his tea, now cold, and watched the fog swallow the runway lights one by one. Then came the sound. At first, it was nothing, a low hum buried in the mist. Cartwright set down his cup. The radar operator, a young Scotsman named MacLeod, frowned at his screen. "Sir, I've got something inbound. Single contact. Low altitude. Coming in fast from the east." Cartwright's heart kicked. "IFF." "Nothing, sir. No identification signal." The hum grew louder, sharper, transforming into the unmistakable growl of an aircraft engine. But it wasn't the smooth roar of a Merlin. This was different, rougher, angrier, the snarl of a Daimler-Benz inverted V12. Cartwright felt his blood go cold. He knew that sound. Every pilot in England knew that sound. "Messerschmitt," he said quietly. The tower erupted. Men grabbed telephones. The alarm bell shattered the morning silence. Crews sprinted toward the Spitfires. But before anyone could reach their aircraft, the shape materialized from the fog like a predator stepping into firelight. The Messerschmitt Bf-109E emerged 50 feet above the runway, wheels down, flaps extended, engine throttled back. It wasn't attacking. It was landing. Cartwright stood frozen at the window. What in God's name? The 109 touched down hard, bounced once, then settled onto the grass strip. Its propeller chopped through the mist as it rolled to a stop near the eastern perimeter. The engine coughed and died. Silence crashed back over the airfield like a hammer. 4-5 full seconds, nobody moved. Then the cockpit canopy slid back. 2 figures climbed out. They wore Luftwaffe flight suits, gray-green with yellow May vests. One was tall and thin, the other shorter with a heavy build. They stood on the wing for a moment, hands raised, palms open. Then they jumped down and walked slowly toward the center of the runway, arms still up, moving like men expecting to be shot at any second. Cartwright grabbed the radio. "All personnel hold fire. Repeat, hold fire. Ground crew, approach with caution. Armed guard to the runway immediately." He turned to MacLeod. "Get Wing Commander Harrison. Now." By the time Cartwright reached the runway, a ring of rifles surrounded the 2 Germans. The tall one looked young, maybe 23, with pale skin and dark circles under his eyes. The shorter one was older, perhaps 30, with a thick neck and a scar running from his left ear to his jawline. Neither spoke. Neither resisted. They simply stood there in the mist, hands behind their heads, staring at the ground. Cartwright approached slowly, his service revolver drawn but pointed down. "Do you speak English?" The tall one looked up. His eyes were gray and hollow. "Yes," he said quietly. "I speak English. What's your name?" "Oberleutnant Erich Hartmann. This is Feldwebel Klaus Ritter." He gestured to the older man beside him. "We have surrendered." Cartwright felt his stomach twist. Surrendered. Not shot down. Not forced to land. Surrendered. Why? Hartmann's face didn't change. "Because we could not do it anymore." The guards shifted nervously. One of them, a corporal with a thick Yorkshire accent, muttered, "Could be a trick, sir. Could be saboteurs." Cartwright didn't take his eyes off Hartmann. "Search them. Check the aircraft. If there's anything, explosives, intelligence, anything, I want to know immediately." He stepped closer. "You're telling me you flew a German fighter across the North Sea and landed here voluntarily?" "Yes." "Why here?" Hartmann finally looked up, and for the first time, Cartwright saw something flicker in those gray eyes. Fear. Or maybe regret. "Because we heard you do not shoot prisoners," Hartmann said softly. "And because we wanted to live." Wing Commander Harrison arrived 10 minutes later, his coat unbuttoned, his face flushed from running. He stopped dead when he saw the Messerschmitt sitting on the grass, its black cross and swastika stark against the green-gray paint. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. Cartwright saluted. "Sir, they flew in and landed voluntarily. They claim to have defected." Harrison walked toward the aircraft, circling it slowly. The 109 was intact. No bullet holes, no damage, fuel still in the tanks. He ran his hand along the fuselage, then turned to the two Germans. "Who are you?" Hartmann repeated his name and rank. Ritter said nothing. Harrison studied them both for a long moment. "Take them to the holding room. No one speaks to them. No one goes near them. Post guards. I want intelligence officers here within the hour." He turned to Cartwright. "And David, this stays quiet. No radio chatter. No telephone calls. Until we know what the hell this is, these men are ghosts." They led Hartmann and Ritter away in handcuffs. The Messerschmitt sat alone on the runway, a black shadow in the fog. Cartwright watched them disappear into the base building, and he felt the weight of something immense settling over the airfield, something that had nothing to do with aircraft or tactics or war. This was about men, and the things that break them. The door closed behind the Germans, and the lock turned with a heavy metallic click that echoed down the corridor. Inside the small room, Hartmann and Ritter sat on opposite ends of a wooden bench, their hands still cuffed in front of them. Neither spoke. Outside, the fog pressed against the window like a living thing, and somewhere in the distance, a Spitfire's engine roared to life. The war continued. But for these two men, it had stopped. The holding room smelled of damp concrete and old wood. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows across the walls. Hartmann sat with his back straight, his hands folded in his lap, staring at a point on the floor that only he could see. Ritter leaned against the wall, eyes closed, breathing slowly through his nose. Neither had spoken since the door closed. Outside, footsteps echoed in the corridor. The lock turned. The door opened. Two men entered. The first was tall and slim, wearing the uniform of an RAF intelligence officer with a major's insignia on his shoulders. His face was sharp, his eyes cold and calculating. The second was older, civilian clothes, round spectacles, carrying a leather briefcase. He had the look of an academic, gray hair, slight stoop, hands marked with ink stains. The major gestured to the guards. "Leave us. Wait outside." The door closed again. The major pulled a chair from the corner and sat directly in front of Hartmann. The civilian stood near the window, watching. Silence filled the room like water rising. Finally, the major spoke. "My name is Major Peter Wycliffe. This is Dr. Edmund Gray from the War Office." His voice was clipped, precise, the voice of a man trained to extract information from reluctant sources. "You will tell us everything. Where you came from, what your mission was, what you know, and most importantly, why you're really here." Hartmann lifted his head slowly. "We told your officer already. We surrendered. That is all." "No." Wycliffe leaned forward. "That is not all. German pilots do not simply fly across the channel and surrender. You have orders. You have a mission. What is it? No mission. Then why? Hartmann's jaw tightened. Because we are tired. Because we have seen too much. Because we did not want to die for nothing. Wycliffe studied him. You're Luftwaffe. You've been trained since childhood to die for the Reich. You've sworn oaths. You've flown combat missions. And suddenly, in September 1941, you decide you've had enough. He shook his head. I don't believe you. Ritter spoke for the first time, his voice rough and low. Believe what you want. It does not change the truth. Dr. Gray moved closer, his expression softer than Wycliffe's. Tell us where you were stationed. Which unit? What operations you flew? If you truly defected, then you've already made your choice. Give us something we can verify. Hartmann looked at Ritter. The older man gave a slight nod. Hartmann exhaled slowly. We were stationed at Abbeville Drucket, Jageschwader 26, 3rd Staffel. We flew escort missions over the Channel and combat air patrols along the French coast. He paused. We have flown together for 8 months. How many kills? Wycliffe asked sharply. I have 11 confirmed victories. Klaus has 16. Wycliffe's expression didn't change. So you're experienced combat pilots. Aces. And you expect me to believe you simply gave up? Yes. Why? Hartmann closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were different, darker, emptier. Because of what happened 3 days ago. The room went still. Gray pulled out a notebook. Go on. Hartmann's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. We were scrambled at 0600 hours on September 14th. 12 aircraft. Orders were to intercept a British bomber formation returning from a raid over Lille. We found them, 9 Blenheims, scattered, damaged, trying to reach the coast. No escort. Easy targets. He stopped. His hands trembled slightly. Ritter stared at the floor. We attacked, Hartmann continued. Standard tactics. We came down from above, sun behind us. I took the lead bomber. Klaus took the second. The others spread out. It should have been quick. But something went wrong. What? Wycliffe demanded. The lead bomber. It was already burning. Engine fire. Trailing smoke. I saw it before I fired, but I fired anyway. Orders were to destroy them all. Hartmann's voice cracked. I hit the cockpit. I saw the pilot slump forward. The aircraft rolled left and went into a dive. But before it went down, the rear hatch opened. 3 men jumped. Parachutes opened. They were alive. Gray wrote quickly. What happened next? Klaus and I broke off. But the others, Lieutenant Fischer, Feldwebel Braun, they went after them. They strafed the parachutes. All 3 men. We saw them fall. We saw them hit the water. Hartmann looked up, and his eyes were wet. They were defenseless. They were already out of the fight. And they shot them. Wycliffe said nothing. When we landed, Hartmann continued, I confronted Fischer. I told him what he did was murder. He laughed. He said they were enemy combatants until they touched ground. He said orders are orders. I told him he was a coward. He reported me to the Staffel Captain. That night, the commander called us both into his office. He asked me if I refused to follow orders. I said no. He asked if I believed German pilots should show mercy to the enemy. I said yes. He told me I was weak. He told me if I questioned orders again, I would be sent to the Eastern Front, or worse. Ritter finally looked up. I told Eric to keep quiet. I told him to survive. But he could not. That night, he said we had to leave. He said if we stayed, we would become like Fisher. Like all of them. Killers of helpless men. So you stole an aircraft and deserted, Wycliffe said flatly. We borrowed an aircraft, Ritter corrected. And yes, we deserted. The room fell silent. Gray closed his notebook slowly. Wycliffe stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Do you have any proof of this story? Witnesses? Documents? No, Hartmann said. Only our word. Then you understand my problem. You could be spies. You could be saboteurs. You could be part of a larger plan to infiltrate British intelligence. For all I know, you shot down one of our bombers yourself, and now you're here with a tragic story to gain our sympathy. Hartmann stood, his chains rattling. Then shoot us. Do it now. Because if you think we flew across the channel, risked death, and landed at an enemy airfield as part of some intelligence trick, then you are a fool. We came here because we wanted to stop killing. We came here because we wanted to be human again. If you cannot understand that, then we have made a mistake, and we deserve whatever happens next. Wycliffe turned. For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not belief, but doubt. He studied Hartmann for a long moment, then glanced at Gray. What do you think? Gray removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. I think, he said carefully, that if they are lying, they are the best actors I have ever seen. And if they are telling the truth, then they are the first of many. Wycliffe frowned. What do you mean? I mean that the war is changing. The Blitz is over. The Eastern Front is bleeding Germany dry. The pilots are exhausted. The stories coming from the continent. Summary executions, reprisals, brutality on both sides. It's affecting morale. If these men are genuine, they won't be the last. Gray put his glasses back on. And we need to be ready for that. Wycliffe looked back at Hartmann and Ritter. You'll remain here under guard. You'll be questioned again. Your aircraft will be examined. If anything doesn't match your story, you'll be transferred to a POW camp and held as spies. Do you understand? Yes, Hartmann said quietly. Wycliffe nodded to the guards. They entered and escorted Hartmann and Ritter to separate cells at the end of the corridor. The door locked behind them. Wycliffe and Gray stood alone in the interrogation room. Do you believe them? Gray asked. Wycliffe didn't answer immediately. He walked to the window and stared out at the Messerschmitt, still sitting on the grass, wings dark against the fog. I don't know, he said finally. But if they're telling the truth, then we've just locked up two men who had the courage to do what most of us only dream about. Which is to stop fighting a war they no longer believe in. Gray nodded slowly. And if they're lying, then we've been fools. And this aircraft is a Trojan horse. Outside, the wind picked up. The fog began to lift. And somewhere across the channel, in a small airfield in northern France, 12 empty chairs sat in a briefing room, waiting for pilots who would never return. The Messerschmitt sat under guard, surrounded by sandbags and a ring of armed sentries. RAF technicians swarmed over it like surgeons over a patient, examining every panel, every rivet, every wire. Squadron leader Thomas Ashford, chief technical officer at Coltishall, stood beneath the wing with a clipboard and a flashlight, his hands already stained with engine grease. He'd been working since dawn, and the sun was high now, burning through the last of the morning fog. Anything. Wycliffe stood beside him, arms crossed. Ashford shook his head. Nothing suspicious. No explosives. No hidden compartments. Fuel tanks are standard. Oxygen system is intact. Guns haven't been fired recently. Barrels are clean, ammunition belts are full. If this is a sabotage operation, it's the most elaborate one I've ever seen. He tapped the fuselage with his knuckles. "This is just an ordinary Bf 109 times 10 to the power of -4. Emil variant. Daimler-Benz DB601A engine. 2 MG-17s in the cowling, 2 MG-FF cannons in the wings. Standard loadout for escort duties. Radio. Removed. They pulled it out before they left. Smart. Eliminates any chance of being tracked or called back." Ashford climbed onto the wing and peered into the cockpit. "There's one odd thing, though." Wycliffe stepped closer. "What?" Ashford pointed to the instrument panel. "Fuel gauge shows they were running on fumes when they landed. Maybe 10 minutes left. They cut it close, very close. If they'd been intercepted over the channel, they wouldn't have made it back." "Intentional." "Has to be. They burned every drop getting here. No margin for error. No plan B." Ashford jumped down. "Major, if this is a trick, it's a suicide mission. And Germans don't typically volunteer for suicide missions unless they're fanatical. These two don't strike me as fanatics." Wycliffe said nothing. He walked around the aircraft slowly, studying the black crosses, the yellow spinner, the personal markings on the tail, a small white eagle above the serial number. "What about identification? Can we verify who they are?" "Working on it. We're checking intelligence records, comparing the aircraft serial number with known Luftwaffe units. But it takes time. Could be days before we know for certain." Ashford wiped his hands on a rag. "In the meantime, what do we do with them?" "We test them," Wycliffe said quietly. That afternoon, they brought Hartmann back to the interrogation room. This time, Gray was alone, sitting at a small table with a map spread out in front of him. Hartmann entered slowly, his hands still cuffed, his face drawn. He hadn't slept. Neither had Ritter. Gray gestured to the chair. "Sit." Hartmann obeyed. Gray slid the map across the table. It was a detailed chart of the French and Belgian coastline, marked with airfields, radar stations, and defensive positions. "Show me where you were stationed." Hartmann leaned forward. His finger hovered over the map for a moment, then touched a point near the coast. "Here. Abbeville Drucket, 15 kilometers south of the Channel." "And the mission on September 14th. Where did the engagement occur?" Hartmann traced a line from Abbeville northeast toward the English coast. "Here. 20 kilometers offshore. The bombers were heading for Dover. We intercepted them near the French side." Gray made notes. "You said there were 12 aircraft in your formation. Give me names. Pilots you flew with." Hartmann closed his eyes. "Hauptmann Wilhelm Schroeder. Staffelkapitän. Oberleutnant Hans Fischer. Lieutenant Karl Hoffmann. Lieutenant Peter Vogel. Feldwebel Anton Braun. Unteroffizier Dieter Koenig." He paused. "And 6 others I did not know well. New replacements. Boys. 17, 18 years old." "And you shot down a Blenheim?" "Yes." "Did you see the markings?" "Squadron identification." Hartmann opened his eyes. "No. It was burning. Smoke obscured the fuselage. But I remember the serial number on the tail, N3522. He looked directly at Gray. "If you check your records, you will find it. 9 Blenheims departed Lille on September 14th. Only 6 returned. 3 were lost. 1 was mine." Gray wrote everything down. Then he stood and walked to the door. "Wait here." Hartmann sat alone for 20 minutes. The room was cold. His breath fogged in the air. He stared at the map, at the line between England and France, at the thin strip of water that now separated him from everything he'd ever known. When Gray returned, he carried a folder. "Blenheim N3522, Gray said quietly, was shot down over the channel on September 14 at approximately 0630 hours. 3 crew members were killed. Their bodies were recovered by a British patrol boat the following day. He opened the folder and placed a photograph on the table. Pilot Officer James Whitmore. Sergeant Alan Clark. Sergeant David Mills. All 3 were found with gunshot wounds consistent with strafing from aircraft weapons. Hartmann stared at the photograph. 3 young faces. Whitmore couldn't have been older than 22. Clark had red hair and freckles. Mills wore glasses. They looked like schoolteachers or clerks or shopkeepers, ordinary men in extraordinary circumstances. Hartmann felt something break inside his chest. "You were telling the truth," Gray said softly. Hartmann didn't respond. He couldn't. Gray sat down across from him. "Eric, may I call you Eric?" "Yes." "Eric, I believe you. I believe what happened to you was real. I believe you saw something that changed you. But I need you to understand something. The men you flew with, Fisher, Braun, the others, they are not unique. They are not monsters. They are products of a system that has convinced them that mercy is weakness and brutality is strength. You broke free of that system. But millions of others have not. And they will keep fighting. They will keep killing. Because they believe they are right." Hartmann looked up, his eyes red. "Then how do we stop them?" "We don't," Gray said. "Not with words. Not with speeches. We stop them by winning. And we win by being better than them. By showing that humanity is stronger than hatred. By proving that men like you, men who refuse to become killers, still exist." He leaned forward. "You defected because you wanted to be human again. Now you have the chance. But it will not be easy. You will be questioned. You will be doubted. You will be imprisoned. And when this war ends, if you live to see it, you will return to a country that views you as a traitor. Are you prepared for that?" Hartmann nodded slowly. "Yes." "Why?" "Because," Hartmann said, his voice steady now, "I would rather be a traitor to the Reich than a murderer of helpless men." Gray closed the folder. "Then we have an understanding." That night, Wycliffe stood in Wing Commander Harrison's office, the intelligence report in his hands. Harrison sat behind his desk, smoking a pipe, his face unreadable. "You believe them," Harrison said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, sir. Everything checks out. The aircraft serial number matches records from JG-26. The engagement on September 14th matches witness reports from returning bomber crews. The names Hartmann gave us, we've cross-referenced with German POWs captured in North Africa. 2 of them confirmed that Fisher and Braun were known for shooting parachutes. They called them Die Jäger, the hunters." Harrison removed his pipe. "What do you recommend?" "Transfer them to a secure facility, separate from other POWs. Keep them isolated until we can confirm there's no security risk. After that—" Wycliffe hesitated. "I think we should use them." "How?" "Intelligence. Propaganda. Testimonies. Show the world that not all Germans are fanatics. That some of them are willing to risk everything to stop the killing. It could be valuable." Harrison was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. "Do it." "But Peter, if you're wrong about them, if this turns out to be a trick, it's on you." "I understand, sir. And one more thing." Harrison stood and walked to the window. Outside, the Messerschmitt sat under floodlights, a dark silhouette against the night sky. "That aircraft, I want it dismantled. Studied. Everything we can learn from it, tactics, technology, weaknesses. And when we're done, I want it destroyed. I don't want it to become a symbol. Not for us. Not for them." Wycliffe saluted. "Yes, sir." In the cells at the end of the corridor, Hartmann and Ritter sat in darkness. They couldn't see each other. They couldn't speak. But through the thin walls, they heard each other breathe. And for the first time in months, they slept without dreaming of falling men. 3 weeks passed before they moved them. The transfer came without warning. 0400 hours, cold rain drumming against the windows, 2 military lorries idling in the courtyard with their engines running low. Hartmann and Ritter were given civilian clothes, old suits that smelled of mothballs and didn't quite fit. No explanations. No goodbyes. Just hands on their shoulders and voices saying, "Time to go." They climbed into the back of separate vehicles. Through the canvas flaps, Hartmann caught one last glimpse of Coltishall, the control tower dark against the pre-dawn sky, the runway lights glowing like embers, the shape of a Spitfire being wheeled toward a hangar. Then the lorry lurched forward, and it was gone. The journey took 6 hours. North, always north. Through villages still sleeping, past checkpoints manned by soldiers who waved them through without question, along roads that grew narrower and rougher until they were barely more than tracks. Hartmann sat on a wooden bench, his hands cuffed to a rail, and watched the English countryside roll past through gaps in the canvas. Stone walls, sheep in morning mist, farmhouses with smoke rising from chimneys. Peaceful. Ordinary. As if the war were happening somewhere else. They stopped at a place called Grisdale Hall. It was a manor house, grey stone and tall windows, surrounded by dense forest. Barbed wire ran along the perimeter. Guard towers stood at each corner. But it wasn't brutal like the camps Hartmann had heard about. There were no searchlights, no dogs, no machine gun nests. Just wire and silence and trees. A British captain met them at the gate. He was older, maybe 50, with white hair and a limp that suggested old wounds. He looked at their papers, then at their faces, and nodded once. "Welcome to Grisdale. You'll be held here as Category A prisoners, which means high security, minimal contact, and no privileges until further notice. Follow the rules, and you'll be treated fairly. Break them, and you'll be transferred somewhere much less pleasant. Understood?" "Yes," Hartmann said. They were led inside, through corridors lined with portraits of long-dead aristocrats, past rooms converted into dormitories and mess halls. Other prisoners were already awake, German officers, U-boat commanders, Luftwaffe pilots shot down over England. They watched Hartmann and Ritter pass with hard eyes and whispered questions. Word had already spread. The deserters. The traitors. Hartmann and Ritter were assigned separate rooms on the 3rd floor. Small, clean, almost monastic, a bed, a desk, a chair, a window that overlooked the forest. Hartmann sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. For the first time since landing at Coltishall, he felt the weight of what they'd done. They had crossed a line. There was no going back. The interrogations continued, but they were different now. No threats, no accusations, just questions. Dr. Gray visited twice a week. He brought books, Goethe, Schiller, even some English novels translated into German. He asked about Hartmann's childhood, his family, his reasons for joining the Luftwaffe. He never asked about tactics or intelligence. He was interested in something else, the human cost of war, the psychology of breaking points, the moment when orders become unbearable. "Do you regret it?" Gray asked one afternoon, sitting across from Hartmann in a small library converted into an interview room. Hartmann thought for a long time. Outside, rain lashed against the windows. "I regret that it was necessary," he said finally. "I regret that the world is such that men like Klaus and I had to choose between murder and treason. But the act itself? No, I do not regret it. What about Klaus? Does he feel the same? You would have to ask him." "I have. He said he regrets nothing except that he didn't do it sooner." Hartmann smiled faintly. "That sounds like Klaus." Gray closed his notebook. "Eric, I want to show you something. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and opened it on the table. Inside were newspaper clippings, German, English, American. Headlines in bold type. Luftwaffe pilots defect to England. Nazi aces surrender in dramatic escape. German airmen refuse to fight. Hartmann stared at the papers. How? We released the story, Gray said quietly. Not the full details. Not your names. But enough to let the world know that not all Germans support Hitler. That some are willing to risk everything to stop the killing. He paused. It's already having an effect. Intelligence reports show morale problems in some Luftwaffe units. Increased defections in North Africa. Whispers of dissent in occupied territories. You and Klaus did something, Eric. You started something. At what cost? That depends. Are you willing to do more? Hartmann looked up. What do you mean? Speak. Testify. Tell your story to journalists, to diplomats, to anyone who will listen. Show the world that conscience still exists. That humanity can survive even in the darkest places. Gray leaned forward. You'll be protected. We'll keep you safe. But you'll also become a symbol. A target. The Reich will call you a traitor. Your comrades will call you a coward. Are you prepared for that? Hartmann thought of Fischer. Of Braun. Of the 3 men falling from the sky. Yes, he said. I am. Ritter refused. I am not a politician, he told Gray in his own interview. I am not a symbol. I am a pilot who did what he had to do. I will not parade my guilt in front of cameras. I will not justify myself to strangers. If the world wants to judge me, let them. But I will not help them do it. Gray nodded. I understand. But you should know, Eric has agreed to speak. With or without you. Ritter's face hardened. Then he is a fool. Why? Because, Ritter said slowly, speaking will not save anyone. It will not end the war. It will only make him a target. And when they come for him, and they will come for him, he will die knowing that his words changed nothing. You don't believe words have power? I believe bullets have power. Bombs have power. Words are just noise. Gray stood to leave, then paused at the door. Klaus, you saved Eric's life. You flew with him across the channel because you believed in what he was doing. Don't abandon him now. Ritter looked away. I am not abandoning him. I am protecting him. By staying silent. Winter came early to Grisdale Hall. Snow blanketed the forest, turning the manor into something from a fairy tale. Hartmann spent his days reading, writing letters that would never be sent, and staring out the window at the trees. He spoke to journalists twice. Careful, controlled interviews with British intelligence officers present. He told them about Fischer. About the parachutes. About the moment he realized he could not continue. The articles appeared in American newspapers. Time magazine. The BBC interviewed him by telephone, his voice distorted to protect his identity. And then, on December 12, 1941, everything changed. News arrived of Pearl Harbor. America was in the war. The world tilted on its axis. Within days, German U-boats were sinking American ships. Luftwaffe bombers struck new targets. The Eastern Front consumed entire armies. The war, which had seemed almost static for months, exploded into something vast and terrible. Hartmann sat in the library, listening to the BBC broadcast on a small radio, and felt the enormity of it crush him. He had thought, hoped, that his defection might matter, that it might inspire others, that it might, in some small way, help end the killing. But the killing had only grown. Gray visited that evening. He found Hartmann sitting in the dark, the radio silent, snow falling outside. You heard, Gray said. Yes. Gray sat down. Eric, you cannot blame yourself for this. I don't. But I also cannot pretend that what I did mattered. The war goes on. Men die. Nothing changes. That's not true. You changed. Klaus changed. The men who read your story, they changed too. Maybe not all of them. Maybe not enough. But some. Gray leaned forward. Do you know what courage is, Eric? It's not the absence of fear. It's not the willingness to die for a cause. It's the willingness to live with the consequences of doing what's right, even when it seems pointless. You chose to be human. That matters. It will always matter. Hartmann didn't respond. Gray stood to leave. There's someone who wants to see you. I've arranged a meeting for tomorrow. He insists on speaking with you alone. Who? Klaus. They met in a small courtyard, snow falling softly around them. Guards stood at a distance, watching but not listening. Ritter looked older, thinner, grayer, worn down by silence and isolation. He stopped a few feet from Hartmann and stared at him for a long moment. You spoke to the newspapers, Ritter said finally. Yes. And now the world knows your name. They know what you did. They know you are a traitor. Yes. Ritter shook his head. You are an idiot, Eric. Hartmann almost smiled. I know. But, Ritter continued, his voice softer now, you are also the bravest man I have ever known. And I am sorry. I am sorry I called you a fool. I am sorry I refused to stand with you. I thought silence would protect us. But I was wrong. Silence protects nothing. Hartmann stepped forward. Klaus, you saved my life. You flew with me when you could have refused. You crossed the channel when you could have stayed. You did enough. No, Ritter said. I did not. But I will. What do you mean? Ritter reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Hartmann. I wrote this last night. It is my testimony, my confession, my story. I want you to give it to Dr. Gray. I want him to publish it. He paused. I want the world to know that I stand with you, that we both chose to be human. Together. Hartmann unfolded the paper. The handwriting was rough, uneven, but the words were clear. My name is Klaus Ritter. I am a deserter. I am a traitor. And I would do it again. Hartmann looked up, his eyes wet. Klaus. Do not thank me, Ritter said. Just live. Live long enough to see this war end. Live long enough to prove that we were right. The war did not end for 4 more years. Hartmann and Ritter remained at Grisdale Hall until 1945. They were never returned to Germany. They were never fully trusted by the British. They existed in a strange limbo, neither prisoners nor free men, neither heroes nor villains. Just 2 pilots who had chosen conscience over duty. When the war finally ended, they were released. Hartmann emigrated to Canada. He married, had children, and never flew again. He died in 1987, quietly, in a small house near Toronto. His obituary mentioned his service in the Luftwaffe but not his defection. Some stories, it seemed, were too complicated for headlines. Ritter returned to Germany. He found his hometown destroyed, his family dead, his name erased from all official records. He lived alone in a small apartment in Hamburg, working as a mechanic, and never spoke of the war. He died in 1963, unknown and unmissed. The Messerschmitt was dismantled, studied, and destroyed, just as Harrison had ordered. No trace of it remains. But the story survived. In archives and interviews and fading newspaper clippings. In the testimony of 2 men who refused to be killers. in the memory of 3 British airmen who fell from the sky and the 2 German pilots who could not forget them. And in the end, perhaps that is enough. To remember that in the midst of the greatest war in history, 2 men chose humanity. And that choice, however small, however forgotten, still echoes. Because conscience, once awakened, cannot be silenced. And the cost of keeping it alive is always worth paying.